Hello. What I wanted to do today, this being a digital conference and the first time we've done it this way, there's no way of knowing who's going to turn up and what people want to do. And as expected, we have quite a small group, and that's fine. Now, I have an agenda based on the title and abstract, and I can run through that, and I will do that for the sake of the recording anyway. But what I can do is I can also mold this to something, it being a small group, I can mold it to anything you need. So just before I kick off, if any of you do have questions or points that you would like to cover in this session, then please do ask now, and I can make a note and make sure that I emphasize, since you've come to the presentation, I can emphasize a little bit of time onto whatever I can help you with. So at this time, if anybody would like to unmute themselves and just let me know if you have a question that you'd like answered or an issue that you were hoping to see addressed, and then I can tell you if I'm able to address that for you. And then after that, I'll go ahead with my agenda and modify it if necessary. So please unmute and let me know if there's anything in particular you'd like to cover within the context of the presentation.
Yeah, I'm just interested what you have to say. So it sounded, your description sounded interesting. I can only stay for about 30 minutes though. So if you are molding it, put the first part, the interesting parts first.
Hey, it's all interesting. Yeah,
it's
sure.
Kind of the opposite, none of them are interesting.
Good point, good point. So that's great, thanks, Paul. Anything else from anyone here that you'd like us to cover particularly? In that case, I'll just assume that the...
Okay, yeah, the other two seem to be muted, so I don't know if Jim...
That's Jim.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, I was just, for a couple of people who just joined, I'm just asking if there's anything that you particularly want me to cover, because rather than just plow through what I've prepared, I'd be happy to adjust it to anything that everybody wants. So Paul's just put in a comment too. Okay, right. Well, the way I decided to structure this was, the year has obviously catapulted us all into a situation we didn't expect. And that can bring all kinds of different things. Now, I wrote the abstract for this and the title in May, and I got it in by the deadline for submissions, which was around about 10th of May. And then JALT kindly gave everybody a chance to modify what they're doing because of the situation that's developing, which I thought about for about an hour or two. And then I thought, actually, there's no point, because the rate of acceleration of this worldwide crisis means that I could change it and it'll be wrong anyway. So I might as well stick with what I've done and leave it and, you know, just stick to what I know. So that's what I've done. And what I decided would not change is that a review of our experience, because it doesn't matter what that is, we can just review where we are. And sure enough, a few months on, we can all think back about the things that we've learned, the things that we have lost, the things we don't know, the things that are good and bad, and so forth, in the context of digital teaching. And then part two, and this is part I'll accelerate a bit because of Paul having to leave, and it's a good thing anyway to get the demo in early. So I'll cut short part one and come back to it afterwards. And part two is really a bit of a review of some of the tools like Zoom, and then dive into things like digital books online and offline and VR. So I'll slightly speed up part one, and then I can always spend more time on part one after part two. And then really, just to finish off at the end, part three is really just to look at some discussions around what we've seen and all the other things that we've reviewed, tools, and discuss any issues and implications, and that will be also incorporating Q&A. So that's the way we'll do it. Now, just to set the context, so I suppose this is my part one, is review of experiences. Well, JALT this year has a lot of presentations based on the same subject as this, things like digital teaching or digital products, things like that, anything digital really, and remote teaching. So I work for English Books JP, and so I have a publishing background. I was a teacher before that, So what I bring is an experience that's based much more in the provision of content than in teaching or pedagogy. And there are so many other experts at JALT who are more capable than me to talk about that sort of thing, the academic side, the pedagogical side. So what I thought I'd bring is from the point of view of the industry that supplies content to the teaching profession is specifically in, well, I say specifically, mainly in ELT, but actually Dave will be able to show something outside of ELT as well, sort of science and so forth. So the experiences in the classroom have been, I mean, I'm guessing because I'm not been in the classroom, but I've spoken to a lot of people, and I think the thing we all seem to agree on is that teachers were suddenly forced to learn what Zoom or Teams or Google is and learn how to teach on a camera on a PC. Just before I progress, is there anything else anyone would like to contribute about sort of a general thing that you've had to experience? This sort of, I think teachers have had to experience being thrown in to this digital and remote teaching environment. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us all? Or are you happy for me to go with that summary?
Just going to say, because of my position, similar to you, I'm in touch with a lot of different teachers, and yeah, it's been a difficult transition.
Sure.
For so many people, and more so for others, depending on the situation. But yeah, it's
right.
Sorry, I'll just ask a question. What's the feedback that you're getting? What's the biggest issue, Paul? Like, is it about, like, I know teachers that are using Zoom for teaching, but holding up a book and saying, here, take a look at this, and right, and they're doing that kind of thing, or they're just putting a PDF up on the page and just saying, let's take a look at this, but there's nothing really productive for the students. Like, is that what your experience is, or what is it that people are?
Mostly what I'm hearing is that schools are disorganized and it's taking its toll on teachers. The worst case seems to be when some schools are requiring online but asynchronous. Some schools are requiring online lessons. Some schools are saying in person. All those are difficult for their obvious reasons. What's most difficult are the schools that are saying, oh, you have to do both, because we have some students who want to do online because they're not comfortable coming to school, but some students feel that they paid for tuition and they should come to school, so you have to prepare. That's probably the most difficult. From the teachers I've spoken to, those are the ones who are the least happy.
Right, and in fact, Paul, you're in the industry too. So what Paul's saying is exactly where I'm coming from too. Yeah. Is that what we've had? We're supplying mainly books, regular hard copy books. And what immediately happened to us is different to what happened to teachers. But we had the teachers on the line asking us questions that we'd never heard before, and also swapping their materials for things that had online components or could be digital books. We also deal with the authors and the publishers who are, depending on their experience, thrusting different ideas and concepts at us about what the publishers should be doing to help teachers in this time. And that led to an absolute cascade of materials and ways of looking at these materials. So that's exactly where I was coming from. Now, what I think we should do now is actually accelerate away from part one and go into a demo, because there may be some limited time. But just to set the context for that and draw on what Dave and Paul have just said, what we found is that teachers have humans have different perceptions of what they need to do in their own situation. And in the teaching environment, we've had people who specifically ask for a digital book, people who specifically ask for a digital learning environment. And we've had people say, what can I do? I've got this book. So at the time of the emergency in Japan, in many ways, this is quite fortunate, but the books had already been shipped. So if you're a teacher, then your books were already in a truck or probably locked in the Seiko waiting for you to come back after the break. And of course you didn't. and neither did the students. So the books are locked away in a bookshop somewhere on a campus where no human is allowed to go. And dealing with the logistics of that was something we felt very hard. And one of the things that happened was that some teachers tried to cancel their books, if you like. But what we found that quite often was that if we went in and offered a digital component along with the book, the preference was actually to use that hard copy book with the students. So there's two things here. One is the sort of platform and type of digital materials. So it could just be a book. It could be an LMS, a learner management system, and that could be at two different levels, probably several, but I'll keep it simple, two different levels. It could be an LMS that your university insists on across the whole school, or it could be something attached to, for example, a Pearson book, mobile world, or whatever they call it. And the same, or it could be, so it could be a publisher proprietary LMS. And the big difference there is obviously the infrastructure, and by that I mean not just technical, but your human infrastructure of teachers. Is it just you, or are you making decisions for a lot of staff, or somebody else, your head of department, making a decision for you? The infrastructure behind whatever you're using has a huge implication for that, and I think that comes back to where Paul's levels of organization are. So what I'd like to do now is actually just accelerate the demo and perhaps pass over to Dave, who's going to help me with this, so that we can look at a way of presenting books digitally, and then look at how that can expand into LMS use as well. And then after that, we'll have a quick break and a bit back to talking, and then perhaps we could do a VR demonstration and then finish off the session by returning to the discussion and issues.
Okay. I can take that over, Colin?
You just did.
I did, okay. All right, so I think just the important part is to maybe establish a baseline for what should be expected. You know, with the, when people talk about ebooks or digital books, they sometimes talk about what I can get on an iPad, but I can't get somewhere else. What I can get with one publisher, but I can't get somewhere else. A PDF book, which has no interactivity, has no real functionality to it. So I think it's important just to set where the baseline is, you know, of what a digital book is. And so I'll just show an example here. And excuse me, I don't mean for anything that would take 6 months or 2 months or 5 months to be able to create, because then there are limitations on being able to do this. But you have to have something that can be created very, very quickly for the publishers and for the authors. And then it has enough tool sets there for, you know, for teachers to be able to use. So I'll take this. So this is one that Colin had provided, or English Books had provided to us. And I'll just go through a couple of the features just so that you can see. So I can zoom in and out on that, okay, and navigate. I can go to, I can go to a, navigate to a page. You have functionality on there that you can use, you know, that students would be able to, let's say you have a pen tool, and, you know, so check 5 things that you'd like to ask your teacher. You know, let's say, how big is your family? You know, how big is, you know, do you like Japan? Things like that. And as Paul was mentioning, you need to have something that can be synchronous and asynchronous, because you'd like to be able to use it, you know, as I'm showing to you right now, but equally you'd want the students to be empowered to have their own books and be able to do the same thing. So this gives you an idea. So again, being able to have it match what's printed is very important, because then there's no disconnect. Because if you have an app, you can sometimes be, well, go to here, 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 and here to try to get to this page that I'm talking about, right? And that's no good. If you want to be on page 3, somebody should be able to open a book, open the print book, they're on page 3. Somebody should be able to use a mobile device, you know, sorry, Just seeing if I have that there. I don't know how this will show up on the, okay. You know, but be able to have a mobile device if you had a tablet or a phone and have the same experience, right? So let's go on, just covered here. Obviously, if there's audio in there, you'd want to be able to play that and listen.
Track 3. Hello, my name's Jun. What's your name? Hi, my name.
So these are very, very basic things that I think that every one of us would expect from a very basic digital book, right? Beyond that, you know, I mean, having the audio there, having the, you know, a video that's in line with that, being able to add in comments. Yes. Okay. Maybe being able to add in a bookmark, if it's we'll say it's a grammar point I want to get back to, and you'll notice the red flag up there. So, Colin, I'm gonna leave it to you from here. Just that, I mean, obviously, be able to search, be able to look for information in there, be able to navigate quickly and easily, and have the book right in front of you, usable, is what I would say is just the baseline. Okay.
Okay.
Any questions from here? I still am a teacher, so I gotta ask.
So looks very good.
Okay.
All right.
Not a question, but thank you.
Just want you to know I'm still here.
Okay, good. Well, somebody's out there, right? So
Great. So thanks, Dave.
anything about this that anybody would want to know, just ask. And otherwise, Colin, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. So again, as Dave said, I don't know how well you can see these, but these are possible on a smartphone. I think my background's interfering with that, but what Dave's just shown is also available on a phone. So the point really at this stage is we've talked about where the experience left teachers, and then it's then like what I call a few forks in the road. It depends what you need. So what Dave's just shown you is a book called Out Front from a small publisher that we represent. And obviously the point with a small publisher is that they don't have the infrastructure, well, the money to spend on the infrastructure that large publishers have. So I think it's fair to say in generalization that large publishers have, for the best part of a decade, in fact, as Paul was saying, you know, we used to talk about this, you know, 7, 8 years ago. So for the best part of a decade, large publishers who have the budget have been investing heavily in digital provision, and some parts of the world have forged ahead with the use of that. And there's been probably a lot of money used up that could have possibly been used wiser in many cases. I think that's always the case with technology. But what you've got here is an entry point, not just for the teacher who wants to use a book, but for the publisher who doesn't have a large IT team and therefore, you know, cannot develop their own platform. So you can have several different publishers on the same platform, which again is another fork in the road, because the long term will tell us what teachers need. But I first sold digital materials in 1997. And that was to the academic community, journals and databases that were not even online, because 97 was slightly ahead of the real take-up of the internet. And these were provided in stacks of CDs. So you have sort of 14 CDs in one stack, and that would be networked across the university. And very quickly, by sort of 1999, that pretty much everything had moved online. And the cost and infrastructure of networking CDs was gone. And suddenly the internet made things a lot simpler. But what happened, the reason I'm mentioning that is because the trend was very, very clear. I didn't know what was going to happen at the time, but by the year 2000, it was very clear that all of these different publisher platforms were rapidly becoming similar. And it was also the same time that Google started to be what Google is today. And in fact, what happened to the publishing world is it was Googled. And librarians refused to buy things unless they had a fairly standard look. So all of the aggregators of journals had a standard look. Now, my guess is that's what's going to happen amongst the publishing and the ELT publishing in the world of textbooks, but it hasn't happened yet. And so the purpose of stating this is that as a teacher now in 2020 in Japan, you've got to make these choices. And as a bookseller and a provider of content, where, you know, in the future we may be selling less books and more content in different ways. We've had a lot of inquiries from teachers in the same way that Paul has, he called it disorganization, and I think that's not too unkind. It's difficult to get organized, especially if you don't know what you're really looking for. But I think one of the big lessons here is keep in mind as a teacher what you really want and what your objective is, whether it's for you and your class only, or whether it's for you and your team teachers, or whether it's your team leader who will inflict what his or her decision is on you. It gives you a chance to put your hand up in the meetings and say, have you thought about what this means if we go with that particular book? So, for example, you could go with, I think it's first-hand access from Pearson, and you get great access to an LMS, but you do have to make the right decision with the workbook, because one of them costs, I think, about 300 yen extra and includes what you need, and the other one doesn't. So you've already got a hybrid there as well, which is another fork in the road. Do you want to use a print book? Do you want to use a print book with an LMS, or do you want to use a digital book? Do you want your students to have the digital book, or is it okay just to do what Dave did, which is just to show something on the screen there? In the case of what Dave showed, you could have both. You can have a teacher showing on screen, but the students can also have it on their smartphone, which is another fork in the road, because one of the things we've overwhelmingly heard is that, and I found this quite surprising, is that students often don't have PCs that are kind of up and running and functioning in the home. So they may be using the Wi-Fi only for their phone, and their parents are using a PC, for example. And they're not even interested in using a PC. And in fact, my own daughter, who's overseas, does so much on her phone that, I mean, I can't even see it. But the generation of students is very, very happy with a phone and possibly a tablet. And we need to think about the devices if we're going to go digital. Overwhelmingly, in Japan, with my experience this summer of selling books for the first and second semester, is that the print book has actually overwhelmingly been the preference. And I'm guessing that that's because teachers have had to learn so much about the delivery platform, Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, that, you know, learning digital content as well is like, if you don't have to do it, then maybe put that off till later. And I think this is later. And now this is a very key agenda point. Okay, I do have more on this, but I'm going to stop again, because what I'd like to do to make sure everybody gets to see a demo can suck time out of a presentation if we're not careful. So I don't want to leave it to the end. So Dave, I wonder if we could move on to VR. And the reason for putting VR in this presentation is to give an example of a way that content can be used digitally that is nothing to do with the book. And it's not to suggest that VR is going to replace books. I mean, it might, but I'm not pushing that particularly. I'm not pushing anything particularly. It's just to show an example of how another technology is already in place and available, and could possibly be used with traditional techniques in a hybrid form, or some people may prefer to just jump into digital provision only. So at that point, I'll just pass it over to our scuba diver here, Dave, and he'll show us what we mean.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody can see this. I need to pull it up myself. Okay, can you see a split screen right there?
Not yet. No, we can't.
It says my screen sharing is paused.
Ah, maybe.
Not too sure why that is.
Under a
I'm just going to stop share and I'll try again.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
That's good.
I'll just check I'm not. I don't think no, I'm not sharing. So.
Okay. How about now?
There we go. Yep.
Okay. All right. So it might be a little distracting, but this is the best I can do, is to be able to show what I'm looking at inside the headset. So you'll see the split screen ahead of you. And in a school, I would be able to do, of course, math or physics or other STEM subjects, but right now I think we're more interested in English language learning. So what I'll do is as a student, I would be able to log into my account. I'm not using any online resources, so I'm not streaming this. Okay. And so if anybody has any questions along the way, don't be afraid to ask.
Dave, I'd like to chip in and just point out to anybody who's not familiar with VR that the reason you've got two sort of goggles on the screen is just because you're portraying something which is virtual reality on a flat screen. And Dave's looking through headphones, so he's only seeing one of these images kind of combined in 3D, if that's the right way to put it.
Okay. So I'll just go to one, just for example. All right, I'll go into one lesson. And I've got a variety of conversations. It won't matter what I take. Eric, what would you like to see? No? Okay. I'll turn that down just a bit. Okay, let's go
Any of them?
sightseeing. Okay.
I see traveling in there.
You're traveling, okay. And checking in at a hotel. Okay, how about that? Or check in at the airport. That's advanced.
Yeah.
I'll just check in at a hotel. The advanced one could be a little bit longer. So what happens here is that I can choose my conversation. It will be modeled for me.
I'd like to check in, please. I have a reservation.
May I have your name, please?
Michael Anderson. Here's my passport.
Let me see. We have your reservation for 2 nights starting today. Please fill out this form.
Sure. By the way, I'm wondering if I can use the internet in my room.
I'm just going to stop that conversation right now. And then now as a student, I can decide whether I want to be the receptionist or I'll be the, play Mr. Anderson, right? As the guest. Paul, which one?
Anderson.
Okay, so I'll play Anderson. So I will embody this person and I'll speak directly with the receptionist and I will have to produce language, okay? We'll see what that looks like. Good afternoon. I'd like to check in. I have a reservation.
May I have your name, please?
Michael Anderson. Here's my passport.
Let me see. We have your reservation for 2 nights starting today. Please fill out this form.
Sure. By the way, I'm wondering if I can use the internet in my room.
Certainly. We have Wi-Fi connections in each room and in the lobby as well.
Great. I like bananas. Oh, sorry. Okay. So
Certainly.
there you
We
go.
have Wi-Fi connections in each room and in the lobby as well.
We don't need to do the entire thing. So right now, any questions?
Pretty amazing. Although disappointing that a 5-star hotel doesn't have bananas.
Well, I ain't staying there. Okay.
No, I wouldn't know that.
So So this is just one of the things that you can do, that even within this is just one of the conversations. Now I can be encouraged to be the receptionist or the guest. I'd have to work through it a couple of times. But, I mean, as teachers, we know that this isn't enough, so you really can go in and have some phonetic practice. Okay, there's pronunciation practice. You move to the keyword, you go to sentence and bit of sentence structure, and then move into the conversation like that, right? So, so that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what's available. This is being used in a couple of universities in Japan, but mainly outside of Japan at the moment. But it gives the students a real sense of time and place because they get to be in that area. You completely remove kind of all the distractors in the classroom or elsewhere that I feel like I actually am in that conversation, and I don't care if my phone's going off. I'm really kind of focused, strictly on that conversation. Okay? And again, as all of us are probably teachers, I would assume, and we know that somebody can go online and study grammar or vocabulary or some listening skills, but to really have productive skills like a speech practice is very, very difficult, if not impossible, by yourself. You really need a teacher or a language buddy, right? And so this is one of the ways to try to get students to actually produce their own language. Okay. So any questions? I'm just trying to turn that right down. And you tell me if you want me to stop sharing, Colin, okay?
Yeah, just before you do, just see if there are any questions because you might want to use the shared screen if there are. So yeah, just for a moment, are there any more questions about the VR that Dave's just shown us? Okay, or are there any other questions for Dave about the digital books, just before we stop sharing the screen? Okay, fine. So I think we're okay. We can just continue and go back to the normal screen.
Yeah, I'll just shut that down.
Okay, great. So what we've looked at so far is I sort of went through fairly quickly the context, and then we looked at the demo of two different platforms for two completely different reasons as well. But there's also other aspects, and I don't need to, I'm not really set up to show you these, but I think most teachers are familiar with these options as well. Dave, did you?
Yeah, I just noticed that there's a question in the chat.
Okay, sorry, I hadn't.
So the question is, do you know if the universities that use this have the students use it in different rooms or all together? Usually, I mean, the university just started into this, only have bought a few of the headsets. So they do allow the students to take them and use them remotely. So it would get a little bit hard, one, to buy so many headsets for a class, and then two, to have everybody speaking at the same time in the class. It's better if they spread out some and speak, in a place that's a little bit quieter. So, and we know how that classes work. So even if you have 15 or 20 classes in small cases, I know some classes can be 30 or 40, maybe many times more, but a lot of the conversation classes can be quite small. It's good for that kind of, rotating kind of work, right? Okay, you and you, go ahead, go and do your VR work. Now, what's important is that they will get graded on this. I wouldn't say graded, but there will be some feedback saying that, let's say in that conversation, great, you got 4 out of 5, right? You missed the one with the bananas, okay? So this is important because as teachers, we have to know what's going on in there. We just don't want somebody going off and doing something, but we'd like to have some kind of recognition of they've completed this task, they've scored well, they've progressed well, okay? So I hope that answers the question. Sorry, Colin.
Okay. So anything else, just, yeah, do drop it in the chat if you like, and we'll keep watching that. And I'll sort of press on ahead. So we've looked at the VR was, I wanted to make sure we got the demo in, especially because I know some people are pressed for time, just to make sure you all get a chance to see that. So I'll sort of backtrack slightly here and go back to the reason for showing that. And it was really to show that there are options outside of books that are digital, and perhaps we're going to see things such as this becoming more popular more quickly in Japan over the coming year or two. It's not that we think that VR is something you should all be adopting for April next year, but to be aware that it's there, and for those that are interested to be able to understand that there are places you can go and this stuff already exists. Then at English Books JP, we're in the middle of quite a lot of things. And even if we're not directly the people that are the experts in any case, we often know how to get you to the experts. So please do come to us with any questions about content you have. In the meantime, of course, we remain very strong in books, and that's for the purpose of helping teachers in what I know is the decision-making period. Most people will probably go with some kind of a book for at least part of what they're doing next year. And it's really to flag up those forks in the road that teachers should be aware of, and the impact that these decisions, that these forks in the road can have on what comes next. So for example, imagine you're very happy with a book you're using because you've used it for years and it's from a major publisher. And you've never used the online version before, but you choose to do it. It's worth giving it a bit of thought to the end as to the book that you're using. And I'm being very general here because I don't want to take sides on publishers here, and there's no reason to. But the book that you're using for years may or may not work for you and your class in the same way when you bring in the digital component. And there are also other considerations. If it's one of those books, and I and my staff in Miyazaki, which is where English Books JP is, I have about 5 to 10 people who are customer facing there, meaning that they're not just selling, but we're receiving orders, we're processing requests, we get requests for advice. And that means that upstream, we're going to publishers or whoever to ask questions about logistics and supply and content itself, and then get back to the customer. Now, we're obviously limited in our resources with only 5 to 10 people doing that, but we're also, I don't know if limited is the right word, but there is a trend from publishers, which was established a long time ago, and is necessary and correct, I would say, that once you move to a digital provision, the publisher tends to want you to go direct. And there is variation in the publishing industry, but very generally, larger publishers don't want the bookseller to be involved in that conversation. And in fact, the bookseller doesn't want to be involved either, because it's a bit like if something goes wrong on your computer and you blame Microsoft. It may not be Microsoft's fault, actually, but that's who you got the software from. And in our case, we can get trapped in the middle. So for example, if you move to the workbook that has the online components, and these components could be either the whole book and quite a lot of material and an essential tying of that book to the LMS, or it could be something that works fairly independently and is actually possibly an option. You don't need the LMS. So again, you've got another fork in the road there. And it's worth looking at your materials that you select very carefully to see whether you will be able to cope with your class and your students if the online component becomes a bit of a burden, which it can do, depending on what it is. And for different reasons. I'm not saying it's going wrong, but it might be designed to function a certain way that you're not expecting. So the best thing to do is to be really careful with your decision making and be aware that there are different types of digital, even just digital books. There's different ways of them being supplied, but there's also, of course, and this is another fork in the road, there's a different way of using it. So that is your decision, really. And I've spoken over the summer to a lot of teachers, and by far the most popular use of digital books has been showing on screen. And obviously I don't know the reason for that, but my guess has been that it's the easiest option, easiest or the most risk-free option. But most of the digital platforms do allow that showing of the book on screen, but some of them actually don't seem to make it very easy. And so it's worth looking, well, it's not worth looking, I would say it's absolutely essential to check your digital platform fully before you invest in it, because once you're there, and sadly, I've had this experience with teachers over the summer, is that once you're in there, you've got whatever it is, it could be 100, in this case it was more than 100 books, meaning more than 100 students across 3 classes invested in this book that was delivered to their homes. There's no going back, and then unfortunately the component wasn't what they wanted. So they ended up really underusing the book, and it wasn't a huge amount of money, but they paid extra for the online provision as well. So that's something to be aware of. So my purpose here has been to try and, as I said at the beginning, to try and come in from a different angle, because there's lots of experts at JALT that could help in presentations with the pedagogy and the usage of specific material or even general material. And what I'm trying to do here is offer a little bit more context and show you that there is a place you can come for advice, and that is the person you're buying your materials from, because we're in the middle and we get a lot of experience of the pitfalls. And I've spent a fair amount of time talking to teachers over this last few months, and they come in with one idea, and I think it's pretty helpful for me to be able to say, we know something else that's happened with that provision, and you need to be ready. For example, one of the companies will only provide customer service at 9 till 5 UK time. So you've got to be, not saying don't use it, I'm just saying you've got to be prepared for that. Because if your student loses their password or something, you're going to have to wait for a full cycle. Now, there are other companies, and I think actually most of them are getting better and better, that are providing Asia time customer support. But that can never be supplied through your book supplier, because when you think we handle about 50 exclusive publishers and several hundred other publishers. Of course, there's probably about 120 in mainstream publishers that we handle, but we cannot learn the infrastructure of 120 publishers and then serve the customers who are buying it. It simply isn't possible. So it is essential to go to the publisher for that customer support. So again, being aware of that. Now, the platform that Dave showed, which was Flexicone, is a very different platform, and that is specifically helpful for smaller publishers, because it's the same infrastructure, which means that you can have several books on the same infrastructure, and you don't have to learn a different functionality regardless of that publisher. So again, it's worth looking at what we're using now, what you want. And the other good thing about small publishers is that they can sometimes move more quickly, because and this has happened with, I can think of I think it's about 5 on Flexicone at the moment, isn't it, Dave? About 5 publishers that came to us over the summer, and what they did was they just make an agreement that they want to provide it digitally, and then sort it out with Dave, and then it's up there on the platform, and thereafter we can supply it to teachers for use. And most of, as I said before, most of the usage has been to show on screen, but it is in fact also equally possible that if somebody wants to make the leap to digital use only, then it can be supplied basically for the same sort of cost as the book, for students to have the same book on their smartphone instead of a print copy. So far, the take up on that hasn't been so large, and I don't know the reason, but my guess is that with so much change being forced on everybody in such a short space, that's probably a big contributor.
If I can just make a comment just for a minute here. So yeah, in Japan, the experience so far has been that there hasn't been a great take up on that, but that's not reflected in other countries. So just in the past couple of weeks, we've had another university in Slovakia, one up in Vancouver, a program in West Virginia, right? And this has just been very, very recent that they've taken it up, and they want books for each of their students because they want the students to be able to study on their own and have that functionality, but then to be also able to teach it synchronously, online. So yeah, I mean, it's happening around the world right now. So Japan's definitely not an isolated case, as we know.
Thanks, Dave. And that's actually a very important point, is again, because we deal with a lot of publishers who are overseas, and we do hear a lot of trends from around the world. And that perhaps might be a prediction, a way of predicting what's going to happen here. Because sometimes I think what's happened over the summer has really pushed parts of Japan 10 years into the future. Without wishing to be unkind, I think some of the universities would not have made a decision to use digital teaching without this emergency situation, and may have hung on for many, many years before changing to a digital solution. But this is a kind of a personal professional opinion, but it seems very unlikely to me that it will just swing back to the way it was. Whatever happens, that will not happen. Something else will. So being prepared for it and listening to trends from around the world is probably quite helpful in predicting what is likely here. I'd like to finish off, and I'll finish off a little bit early because, as discussed with Andrus, the room host, I'll sort of finish around about 10 minutes early, so we've got time for some proper questions and answers if necessary. And just the thing that I haven't yet covered, but I wanted to slot in here, is even using Flexicone with what Dave's shown you, one other thing that does is it gives independent authors, which are often teachers, the chance to self-publish digitally, either from scratch or to move across to that. So because you don't have to invest in the huge infrastructure to make a digital LMS and digital book of your own, it's actually potentially leveling the playing field. So for anybody who's into writing materials, that's one place you can look. And another place, obviously, is Moodle. And it's not my position to tell teachers how to use Moodle, but what I have seen over the summer is some fantastic use of Moodle with, if you like, equating printed books through some of the authors we know and publishers into a Moodle version of that book. And again, Moodle is a universal website. So just trying to predict the future a little bit, or predict what might happen. If you remember a while earlier, I said, in the 90s, the trend was that the market pushed publishers away from proprietary LMSs or the equivalent in terms of journals, and became Googleized. They became a universal offering, or offerings that looked very similar and operated very similar was demanded by the university library market globally. And that's what it is today. And I think that trend, again, with the likes of Moodle, which is a completely different way of offering a digital provision to teachers, and has been going for a while now. So probably will have an influence, as will perhaps others like Moodle, on the look and feel of what is digitally provided. The only problem I can see for content there is that providing content on Moodle is actually pretty complicated and takes a lot of time. It's another fork in the road from the publisher, the small publisher, independent publisher and author side. Are you a tech-savvy publisher who can deal with loading up on Moodle, or do you need somebody else like Flexicone to load that book in its entirety for you? Okay, so just in summary, what we've covered is, I hope, we've used some experience which is not teaching experience so much, it's outside, it's in the industry, to look at some of the digital provisions available, draw on some of the experience, both of ourselves and those of you here, to find conclusions in the sense, I hope, that there are things that need to be considered if you're going to go forward with more less traditional decision making on content, as is very likely the case, meaning you're not just using a book. So I will finish off there, if that's right, Andras, and open it up for questions, discussion, and so forth. But thank you all for coming, by the way.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Colin. This is a great talk. Yeah, so so as Colin said, if anyone has any questions, feel free either in chat. I've noticed Dave's been responding in chat, and if you want to unmic yourself, or if you want to unmute yourself and join in, please do.
I'll ask Jim. What was it? Sorry, TY at Pyron Dave. Pyron Dave is it? So that's my Twitter.
Yeah, found you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good.
Started talking.
All right.
Colin, thank you. That was really interesting. And you painted a big picture of where I found our school this year, a small language school with books in the cupboard that we can't use, technology available, and it became redundant quickly. Other stuff that we couldn't afford to buy but wanted to. And then students stuck at home using iPads with no Wi-Fi, or granny's computer and they don't know how to use a keyboard. And just every single issue that you've outlined, we've banged our head against this year. And we know we're going to be doing exactly the same thing this winter, and the goalposts will be consistently moving.
Sure. Well, yeah, thanks. I mean, thanks for sharing the pain there. It's just to let you know, I mean, the thing I can do, Jim, is let you know that you're not alone, I suppose.
Well, I've realized that in the last hour. Thank you. Yeah. I'll be calling you every afternoon now.
Yes, the danger is now that I'm going to be extremely busy, of course. Yeah. But no, we'd be happy to help. And I mean, it's really, I think the sharing of experience, I'm hoping that that can really help some people with their decisions, because I'm not trying to take sides with anything. And I don't want to go into the details of, you know, which ones have been a problem, because sometimes it's, let's face it, the whole world has had problems this year. And, you know, that some of the big publishers did get pushed for providing customer service. But, you know, I mean, it's a hell of a time. They probably have the rest of the world trying to call their call center, and they haven't anticipated that weight of calls. So same for Zoom. I mean, and Zoom themselves they seem to have stepped up very nicely, and I'm sure they're doing well in business. But actually, you know, they ran out of customer support as well over the summer. But you know, everybody's trying to find their way. You know, so it's not about pointing the finger. It's about helping decisions, really, so that you can minimize the risk and the troubles you have.
Colin, there's a question in chat.
Oh yeah.
Check.
Okay, so the question, I'll just read it out in case somebody is English Books JP looking to offer courses via our own LMS? The quick answer is no, because we're really an intermediary. We supply content. I'm using the word content instead of books now. We may have to change our website at some point, but English Books JP. So we get involved to an extent in the publishing process and the provision of content with some of our smaller publishers. But for larger publishers, we're very much an intermediary, and we're offering the sort of expertise of supplying, because it's quite complicated to get large numbers of books to the right place at the right time, especially a lot of them are imported. So it's really a combination of sort of logistics and knowing about the content and being able to work with teachers to get the right content in the right place at the right time. So to answer your question, we will be working with partners, as we do now with publishing partners, and Dave's one of those partners at Flexicone, to help provide things that teachers really need. And you know, the market will dictate what people choose, and that'll be what they need. What we will do, I think one of the things for us with the Flexicone platform is that it's publisher agnostic. So, and many of our, well, almost all of our exclusive publishers are small. They don't have the budgets to pay IT staff. So it's a solution that we're working on with them.
Can I'll just add in one thing about LMSs. You know, Colin did mention about Moodle, and that's good, right? But one of the problems is that, you know, if you start building into the LMS, you're locked only to that particular platform. And when you try to move it out, you're done, right? And there's Moodle and Blackboard and Classera and, you know, D2L, and it goes on and on and on. So it really is important to expect a book that, you know, that has some data with it, that, you know, you can answer a question in the book and it gets tracked back into your LMS, because you don't want to be running a couple of different LMSs. If I want a book, I have to go to Oxford, or I want this book, I have to go to, and I have to get to know those systems. So the expectation should be, and it's just as teachers, you just have to tell them that expectation, because the technology's there. That's not the problem, okay? And actually, you know, on a personal note, about 8-9 years ago, brought this out into the market, was that, you know, you should be expecting to answer the questions in the book, go, you know, and any device, any ability, online, offline, all that stuff. And people say, no, I the iPad, you know, that's the only thing I want to use. My school's doing this. So there was no expectation at that time. Everybody just said, no, we're getting Kindles, or no, we're getting iPads. And then it was never the thought about the content. So as teachers, if you push and you just say, listen, I need this, and just tell them what it is, and make that expectation necessary for the publishers. The technology is there, the ability is there, the speed, it doesn't have to be an expensive process. It doesn't have to incur any costs, right? So, but as teachers, you need to set that bar. And that's, whether it's Flexicone, I don't really care. It just, that should be the baseline, like I said, of what you say to the publishers. When they just say, you know, no, just take a PDF and you're going to be fine. I just don't think that's a reasonable option. So that's all. Okay. I actually have another meeting. I have to run away. So
well, I think
anybody wants to contact me, that's fine. Okay. Colin has my my contact, and, or you can.
So I'm in the EME.
Hi, Ron, Dave. Okay.
So you can come to see me after this session, which is just ending now in the EME.
Okay. But I have to leave right now. Okay. So thank you, everybody.
Ending the session there. Anyway, if you don't mind, Colin.
No, thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. So Colin, you're going to be, you'll be in the educational materials area.
Yeah,
so,
I've got a Zoom session running in there in a minute. So
okay.
I'll be running over there.
Okay, so if you want to continue the conversation with Colin, he'll be there. Also, definitely check out all the educational materials. You can do that in the Eventzilla on the homepage. You can find that it's the big green button. So I encourage you to go there. And also, there's many SIGs and SIG topic discussion rooms available. You can find on Eventzilla as well. So please enjoy the full range of the options that the JALT conference has to offer. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Well done.
Thanks. Bye.